All right, we're going to look at our SquareArrays.java program and the runner. The purpose of this program is to create a square array, be able to modify the values in the array, get the sum of the columns or the sum of the rows. All right, the first thing we need to do is we have a public class SquareArrays, and I'm going to declare a int array, an int 2D array called SquareArray, and a integer or an int num. And int num will be the number of rows and columns. My constructor will take an int, and just because I want to make sure I've got it, I save num into this.num, and then I make a square array that is a 2D int array, and it's new int num num. Since these are both the same, it will be square. I now have a method that returns nothing but creates a new array from an array that's sent in, so that I can send the entire array at one time. And so this simply says put the array that I sent in into my square array. And then, just to make sure I've done something, I've printed this out. I will eventually comment these two lines out, so all I do is get my new array. I then have a method called getLength that returns the length of the array, which is the number of rows. Now, again, because this is a square array, the number of rows and columns will be the same. I now have a method called columnSum, and it takes an int called c, and this is going to sum only the values in whichever column I send in, and it will return an int which will be the sum of those values. So the first thing we do is initialize sum to 0, and now we're going to loop from I equals 0 to I is less than SquareArray.length I plus plus. So this is the number of rows. So sum plus equals SquareArrays IC says whatever is in sum, add to it the value that is in the square array in row I, column C. So whichever column I'm sending in, I'm going to add all of the values, or I'm going to add the values in all the rows that have a column C, and then I will return that. I've done the same thing with a row sum, where I'm going to send in the row number that I want to sum. I'm going to initialize my sum to 0. I'm going to loop from I equals 0 to SquareArray row 0 dot length, which will give me the number of columns. And then in similar fashion, I will say whatever is in sum, add to it the value that is in SquareArray R, and then I as I loop through. And then I return that sum. I have a method called getValue, and I'll explain this when we get into the actual runner, why I need this. I'm going to have an R and a C, so I can get any row and column value. And so what I'm going to return is SquareArray RC. In similar fashion, I'm going to have a setValue method. Notice it's void because I'm not going to return anything. And so I send in a row and a column, but this time I also have to send in a value. So what I do is I set value equal to square array RC. This is going to give me another way to create my array. All right, and that's the entirety of the SquareArrays.java program. Going back to the top, I have instance variables. I have my constructor, and it just takes a single int, and it makes the square array that size. I then have a new array, and it will take an array called cent. It will take cent and put it into square array. I have a getLength method. I have a getLength method. I have a columnSum method. I have a rowSum method, and then I have a getValue and setValue methods. And that makes up my program. In my runner, I am now going to declare an int array called new array, and it will be new int 33. And my num is 3, so strangely enough I'm going to be able to use that. So square array A1 is a new square array, and I'm going to send it num, so that should give me a 3 by 3 array of ints. Now I'm going to call my new array method on A1, and I'm going to send it this new array. And then to see if anything happens, I'm going to say for I equals 0 to I is A1.getLength. Now, you would think that since A1 is an array, that you could just say getLength, or you could just say A1.length. Well, A1 is a square arrays, and so I can't do that. I have to call the method getLength on the square arrays A1. And then I'm going to say int A equals A1.getValue, and I now am going to do I0. So I'm going to take all of the rows, and I'm going to print out the value that's in column 0, and then I'm going to print it out. And this is just to make sure everything is working. I'm now going to declare another int array, 2D array, called new2, and I'm going to set it to my favorite 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've got a 3 by 3 array. So I now again declare square arrays A2 as a new square arrays num, and now I set A2 new array new2, and I'm now going to print it out so that I get the values that are in all of the rows at column 0. This is just a time-saving device. Now, I'm going to declare an array of ints that is going to be called columnSum, and it's going to be a new int num. So since there are num columns, this will have num spaces for array sum. I can then say that the sum is equal to a2.columnSum at 0, and I'm going to print that out. And so to be somewhat more correct, I should say the sum of the VAL in Okay, so this is going to be the sum of the values in column 0 because that's what I sent in. I'm now going to loop through all of the columns and put their sum into the array column sum. So when I is 0, I will sum all the values in column 0 and put it into the 0th element. Then I is 1, and I'll get all of column 1. Then I is 2, all of column 2. Then this is going to print out the values so that I know I've done it correctly. I repeat the procedure with row sum, and I get, first of all, the sum of the items in A2 row 0 and print that out, and then I loop through, and again I loop through and print that all out. So alright, so that gets all of that. Now here is something else I can do. This is using the get length and the set value. So let's go back up. Whoop. Remember that A1 was a square array, and we put in new array, which was an empty array, so it should have been all zeros. We'll find out in a moment. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overwrite those values. So I'm going to go through and say, as I go through ij, I'm going to set the value I plus j. Now see if that's going to work. Yeah. All right. So reset, yes. All right. So now, having set the values at ij as I plus j, it would be good to print everything out again. So we're going to do I for the rows and j for the columns, and then we're going to say the value at row I column j is a1 dot get value at ij. All right. So let's see what happens when we run this. We're going to compile it, and let's run it, and we get a whole lot of stuff. All right, so we have A1 new array, and we print out the values in all of the rows at column 0. Well, what is new array? New array is my empty 3x3 array, so I get all zeros when I created it, and I get all zeros from my print. Well, that works very nicely. Now, here is my new 2. So I create it, and here we have 159. So when I instantiate, I print the element at 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. And then here it says the value of array A2 is 147, so that's 147 because I printed it at all column 0 in row 0, 1, and 2. So that's 1, 4, and 7. All right, now it says the sum of column 0 is 12. So that's column 0 is 1 plus 4 is 5 plus 7 is 12. And then, so that was that one. And then we loop through, and luckily we get the same 12 and 15 and 18. And you can go back through, whoops, wrong place. You can go back up here and say, all right, we did 1 plus 4 plus 7, then we're going to do 2 plus 5 plus 8 is the 15, and 3 plus 6 is 9, 9 and 9 is 18, and there's 18. All right, row 0 is 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. Very nicely done. So I get the sum of the items in row 0 are 6, and it repeats itself. 7 plus 8 are 15 plus 9 is 24, so the sum of row 2 is 24, and that works very nicely. So this is where I am redoing A1. Remember that A1 used to be all zeros. So now what I'm going to do is set value at ij at I plus j. So I then print that out. So in row 0, column 0 is 0, row 0. So 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. And then we go all the way through. So this just shows that I have successfully added values to the array. All right, to wrap up, we've written the SquareArrays program. We have instance variables that is a square array and a num, so that we can make a square array. We can construct a square array of size num so that the rows and the columns are the same. And so that effectively is going to make an empty array of the correct size. We can then send in an array and make our array that will have values as opposed to simply being empty. And we printed it out, and we don't need that now, so we will comment that out. We had a get length method, and we said we needed that because in the runner, if we go over here to the runner, bloop, after I have made A2, A2 is not actually an array, it is a SquareArrays. So this is one of those, if I said int val equals A2 0, whoops, 0. If I do that, it's not going to do what one would expect. If this was simply an array, I'd get an integer value, but when I compile this, it throws an error. It says array required but SquareArrays found. This is an instance of a SquareArrays. So what I have to do is say dot get 0, 0, and then it compiles just fine. So we have to remember that A2 is an object, and it needs to call a method in order to have anything happen. So that was one of our lessons for the day. All right, so I've put values in. I've then looped through and get the values out and print them, proving that I got something. I've made an int array called column sum that will take each of the column sums and store it so I can get to them later. And this example simply gets one of them, the column 0, and I did that as I was going along so that I would know that it worked. And then I can comment this out, because what I really want to be able to do is loop through all of the columns and put the sum into the array column sum, and then I can print out for column number whatever the sum is. And I did exactly the same thing for the rows. And there's the array row sum, and now I can take this and comment it out, and all I really want to do is loop through and put each row sum into the array row sum, and then I can print that out. And prettying this up a little bit. All right, and in this case, I'm going to fill an array. A1 is the square array that had all zeros in it, and so now I'm going to fill that array. So I use the set value ij, and then I fill it at I plus j. I could fill this with anything I wanted to if I got excited. And then we're going to, he says, print out each of those values. So I get value at ij as I loop through. And believe it or not, that's everything. So that pretty much does all of the things we would want to do with a square array, and we now know that it works. We compile it and we run it, and we get all the numbers that we should. And I won't bore you by going through it again. Okay, there you are, square arrays. More fun than anybody deserves.